to Disambiguation. I'm your host, Michael Fawcett. Each week we interview experts in AI, generative AI, and business automation to help business leaders understand how to use these tools for the biggest business impact. In our show today, we look at precision diagnostics and the use of AI. And I'm really excited. I'm joined today by Morris Panner, who is an old friend from a different world, but now involved deeply in this idea of imaging and diagnostics. So, Morris, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's really great to be here. It is not lost on me that our friendship and our collaboration goes back many years through some different innovation cycles. I think we started together in cloud innovation. And in some ways, this is a very logical extension of the kind of computing power and ability to collaborate that I like to think we kicked along in our own humble way back in the day.
Yeah, no, I think you're absolutely right, and I love the place that we've gotten to. It's really exciting times again, I think. Well, so why don't you do a quick introduction for the audience, and then just tell us a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Morris Panner, and I'm president of a company called Intelerad Medical Systems. And Intelerad, simply put, helps radiologists, other doctors, even patients now look at X-rays, MRIs, CTs, so complex medical imaging, put those in the cloud, share them, and now increasingly, and hence a little bit why we're here today, apply AI and other advanced algorithms and really change the way people get care and the way people do scientific research. So it's been a really wonderful experience for me.
Nice. Well, so I definitely want to dive into AI, and that's obviously my passion these days as well as yours. But I was thinking about this a little bit around the idea of imaging, and so I think maybe it would help first to just kind of what kind of problems were you looking to solve when you first got involved in this for both patients and providers?
So interestingly enough, if you think back on the history of medical imaging, up until the time that they had X-rays, which was not very long ago, a century, something like that, the only way to see inside of a person was to open that person, and that had disastrous effects. Now, the impact of advanced visualization tools, where you're able to see inside of a human body, started out as kind of I wouldn't say routine, but a diagnostic tool that was very much associated with a place. You went to a hospital, you went to a center, and you got a study, and then something happened. But now the healthcare system has changed dramatically. And I think it was Oliver Wyman who said some of the most interesting things in healthcare are happening outside the hospital. I think what they were getting at is it's a very interconnected ecosystem. So now what we were trying to do, and why I got excited about this, I think one of the things that got me excited about cloud computing back in the day was the idea that as a distributed workforce needed to collaborate, you could get that multiplier effect from cloud technology.
Yep.
That's happening in healthcare now. So if you can imagine the power of making these very insightful diagnostic tools available across a continuum of experts, you start to appreciate the power of what we're trying to do. So we now link groups of physicians in the thousands. We just signed the deal or we're implementing the deal to connect the largest healthcare system in the state of Michigan. And when you start talking about that kind of scale, and you're dealing with patient privacy in a sensitive and HIPAA, that's our main federal regulation, in the way that meets that standard, and you're making it accessible and useful, it really is life changing. And one of our mottos is we think of ourselves as kind of a humble part of the care team. We're not providing a diagnosis. We're not caring for a patient. We're not doing that hard frontline work, but we are trying to provide the tools to make that work go more smoothly and to be a kind of a force multiplier for the people who are able to bring their kind of intellectual and caring firepower to those challenges.
So I mean, it sounds like two pieces. One, obviously, the collaborative effort, the collaborative effect to that is something that you really couldn't do without the technology to being where it is now, right? And then also the idea that you're a force multiplier. You're increasing productivity. I mean, we've talked about, just in fact, my use of generative AI tools and that sort of thing over the last year and a half, and it is a huge force multiplier. So I could see how that would make a lot of sense in this environment.
Yeah, and I think you're a good proof point. In the lead up to the show, we were chatting, and you'd mentioned, I'll toot your horn for a second, but you were named one of the top AI analyst firms in the world. And what really made that possible was a very smart leader, and then a person who could use a lot of distributed AI tools. In fact, you use a lot of what you talk about. And that's sort of a small illustration of what happens when you start applying tools like this to a particular problem set. And it doesn't mean that you're not working with a lot of other people and collaborating with a lot of different folks,
Sure.
but you are able to do a lot more, I think, than you could have done without those same sets of tools and get a top ranking. That's really a testament to how this works. So imagine that in a healthcare setting, you want your doctor that smart.
Yeah, there's no question. I want my doctor that smart. So,
Yeah.
So if we think about AI, generative AI particularly, how are you using it today in healthcare imaging and diagnosis?
So it's a really important question. And what's kind of exciting about the question is the answer is changing every day. Let me try, if I can, to back up for a sec and talk about two very big groups or approaches for using generative AI inside of, let's call it, imaging. And when you think of imaging, let's just assume for a second it's everything from an X-ray, if you twist your ankle on the basketball court, to, if God forbid, I have a brain tumor and need a complex CT, and any of that range. First, let's go with the stuff that I think is a little bit less controversial. And I like to call that workflow tools. And in a way, it probably is not that different than some of what you and I looked at back in the day on accounting software or expense reporting. You need to get something to the right person at the right time. And you need the right set of eyes on something, whether that's an approver or whether that's a technician who has to make sure that whatever happened properly.
Right.
And so generative AI is very good at checking a lot of data points to make sure that something is complete. So if I sit on a scanner and someone looks at me, forget whether or not I have an illness. The first question is, did we get all of the information we'd hoped to get so that someone could make an informed judgment? That's that. That is something where we can really speed up and improve the workflow and eliminate a lot of stress. We can make machines faster. We can make machines capture things better. We can make technicians better. We can do all of that. And that we like to call workflow. And that's pretty straightforward. I don't think a lot of people find that threatening or even that controversial. They almost can kind of imagine that as an advanced version of spell check. I mean, that's pretty, believe me, anyone who's working on me would now throw tomatoes at me. You get the idea.
Yeah.
Then a continuum of that is when you start to say, there's so much information in a digital image. It's capturing millions and millions of pixels, just dots. And what's remarkable, I remember this conversation a few years ago when I talked to a leading neuroradiologist at the Mayo Clinic. And he said to me, one of the reasons why I'm excited about this is I think an algorithm is going to be able to see things in the pixels before I can. And again, not saying that that's because he's not good at what he does. It's because a computer can sift through every little piece of data and find an abnormality before somebody else can. So now we start moving down the very broad continuum of what you could call diagnostic AI. And some of that looks a little bit like workflow. All it says is something doesn't look right here. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it's not what I expected. Right. Generative AI is very good at that. If you think there should be a period at the end of every sentence, they don't know if there should be or shouldn't be. They just know that that they expect one. So now we're in the world of very interesting opportunities for AI to assist physicians. You can imagine a world where you have, and we run this today, a woman has her mammogram, and at the end of the mammogram, not only does the physician look at it, but an AI application can look at it, can either highlight things to the physician that she may want to think about or look at, or provide their own view of what they think should be there. And then that serves as a quality control for the physician. Again, not that crazy, because although we don't often realize it, high end, and we hope the medical profession writ large, has a lot of rules about quality. And they're always kind of checking, did you get the right answer? Do the physicians agree? So right now we're in the midst of this world where those two basic workflows, one I call workflow and the other's diagnostic, but those two basic streams of work are happening right now. I'm then going to kind of tease the third area, which I think is in some ways what's going to change everything, which is you start to have a real synthesis of information that lets you start to do some of what the title of this podcast is, which is precision diagnostics in the world of AI. And I would go even a step forward, where you're starting to see very big pharma companies and little pharma companies too, but you see scientific researchers start to come up with new theories and new approaches for therapies based on what the AI is seeing and suggesting. I mean, I get up every day and I have a lot of fun, because this is just one of the things that is it's so energizing. I think you can see that it's really holds out the promise of making things simply better.
Yeah. I mean, that's exciting, and I think those three buckets help me a lot to picture kind of where you're going. I mean, the workflow piece, obviously, that makes a lot of sense. You've got people that have to work together. They need to, prioritize things. That's logical. And then, of course, the idea that it could enhance or, help the image in some way, because that, again, I'm a photographer. I mean, I use tools to enhance my images all the time, right? That makes sense. But then that last one is kind of the future of diagnostics, in a way that says, oh, look, we can start to predict, and manage risk better because of that, or even designer treatments almost. Like, yeah, that's interesting.
Maybe one way to think about that is there's been a revolution in the way people think about oncology, about cancer care. I think in the old days, if I got a cancer, it would be very much associated with the organ where that cancer manifests itself. Right. I have lung cancer, I have liver cancer. And believe me, there's still that nomenclature around. But I think what you're seeing in the most advanced therapy platforms right now is a sense that these organisms, these almost like horror film things attached to their body, are much more complicated than we thought, but have kind of a life of their own and move around your body in a way that requires a different approach. And one of the ways they start to see commonalities between disease is through imaging. And one of the things that has probably been the most important in transforming that piece has been complex imaging. It's really been a very interesting story. And it is changing the way oncologists talk about cancer, which is really remarkable. I don't know if that's quite seeped into the popular consciousness yet, but it's certainly going on when you see people mounting companies. They talk about mounting a technology platform to attack cancer. Taking all these inputs and they're trying to target a therapy in a way they never could before.
Yeah. I mean, that is a logical, as I think about that process of, and especially the effectiveness of the tools and the algorithms to start to see increase in accuracy, increase of efficiency, detecting those diseases, finding similarities and differences, and then, it gives you a much better view of it than you could have ever done in just a traditional, radiology does the evaluation of the thing and says, I wonder about another thing too, as you were talking about this, it seems to me like there's also probably, even now, just a simple one of there's something bad in this image that we need to look at quickly. So in other words, prioritization in that workflow too. I mean, is that something that you've seen in the application of this?
Yeah, I don't know whether you've been sitting in on our product. You are a keen product manager, so I don't know whether you were sitting in on one of our product management discussions. But if you think about our product, part of it is the visualization of the imaging. And the other part of it is the what we call an orchestrator or work list. It's just basically it's not any different than a to-do list, but it's a
Yeah.
little more complicated than that.
Yeah, yeah.
Where things go. And what we are getting ready to announce, and I guess I'm announcing it now, is,
You heard it here first, folks.
yes, is our ability to take an AI feed that will prioritize that case inside of our orchestrator. And what that means is, I'll give you the easiest example to kind of think about is in the world of stroke care, they say minutes or brain and time is brain.
Mm,
It makes a big difference whether you get treatment in 5 minutes or 3 hours. Makes a big difference. And not everything in healthcare is like that. Like
right.
most of the time, thinking about it a little bit is probably a good idea. But in stroke care, if something's going wrong with your brain and there's a lack of blood flow, oxygen, you need to move fast.
Right.
And so now what we can do literally is we can be part of the workflow that says, if somebody's been taken to a institution that has a scanner, but not necessarily the experts that can perform that next level of treatment,
Mm,
what we can do is take the feed directly from the scanner, run an algorithm on top of that, and then have that result modify the way the workflow works for that patient.
mm,
That's
that's
great.
cool. Yeah.
Now, none of that, by the way, is something a human couldn't do. If there were enough humans watching everything, you could kind of get on the phone and say, hey, let's get going here. But to have it happen automatically is something that I think is going to lead to a lot of better outcomes. And one of the reasons I think this is our customers want it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you were sitting in because that's exactly.
Well, it's just a logical use of the technology. And if you talk about workflow and prioritization, it seems to me that a part of that, especially that sort of initial assessment, is exactly that. Like, oh, we need to do something now versus we can treat this over some period of time, right? I mean, there's criticality, I guess is the
Yeah,
word. Yeah, that makes sense.
100%. And so that to us is why it's happening so fast, because
Mm,
2 years ago, 3 years ago, I'm not sure you could have done that.
mm. Yeah, I think that's, I mean, obviously machine learning, we did a lot with the algorithms there and they've gotten much more advanced, but the application of generative AI really fits a lot of these sort of tasks. So it just makes sense to me that we're seeing a big improvement there. One of the things that I've done a work in a different area in customer experience around synthetic customers or synthetic data, and I just wonder, is that something that you see in the healthcare world? Is there capability of creating synthetic imaging or for training or that sort of thing, or is that out there a little much?
No, no. Again, you're spot on. I don't know if this is our product management meeting, but it is a product management meeting where what you are doing is taking the data and you are creating either a digital twin
Mm,
or literally a synthetic human. And the reason they do that is partly to get around not get around, but to avoid the privacy implications
mm,
of working with actual humans. You try to, in scientific research, one of the things we have to do, which is hard to do because of the depth of all the information we get, But we need to do what we call de-identify. We don't anonymize the data, but we have to de-identify the
Yep.
data. And if you can avoid sometimes that and create something that's synthetic so that you're not actually working with any ID identifiable data, you don't have to worry. I'll give you an example of how crazy it is. You've had examples where someone could identify someone just by the structure, by some of the physical structures.
Right.
Forget whether there was even a name or a birth date or a location. And so, as a consequence, there is a desire sometimes to have something that you can just work with, and no one could ever say, "That's really Morris, isn't it?" And no, it's nobody actually, but it's good information. So, what I think you're starting to see generative AI do is, uh, and I think this is also ethically complex, generative AI is starting to teach itself, right? I mean, that's one of the things that it is doing, and it's able to critique itself, and it's able to say, is this really a legitimate sample set? Is this really good data? It's a little futuristic, but that's happening out there, and there are companies dedicated to the creation of that right now. I'd say still the biggest probably focus has been on taking people and trying to aggregate that data and de-identify it so you have large sample sets. But what you mentioned is definitely, I think,
that
of
makes sense.
companies you could invest in right now that are trying to do that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it is a thing that that we're seeing in the enterprise vendors' approach to this, right?
Yeah.
This idea of building a trust layer or whatever you want to call it, right? And part of that is masking and de-identifying, right? I mean, in customer service, I might want to use my own company data, but I don't want it to mix with the language model's data, nor do I want to use personally identifiable information to train the language model. So I de-identify that and then re-identify it once I put it back. So that's a logical step for me in the medical side of it too. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say the other thing that's happening, which I think you may be happening also in even faster in some of the consumer side, and the consumer side, financial sector is ahead of healthcare. It always has been.
Yeah.
But one of the things that is happening right now in healthcare, again, it's maybe old news for you, but in your sectors, but it is continuing to extend. These large language models are continuing to extend their reach. So what used to happen was you'd have a point solution that would say, I'm going to analyze the lung nodule in Morris's uh, chest. Interesting, very interesting. And now you're starting to see approaches that say, let me look at all the pathology. Let me extend that to the point where I can literally give the radiologist a first draft of a report. It may not say that Morris has cancer, but it's going to say, A, there's something funny here. You should look at it. And then maybe I'm even going to give you 5 options that I think it might be. And then you can kind of go from there. And there's 2 things about that. One, what's nice about healthcare is if somebody looks at you, their goal really is to address the problem you came in with. That's kind of what you want. But every once in a while, it would be nice if they picked up that doodad that was going to grow into something bad later on. And AI can kind of do that. And one of the hard things for all of us to do cognitively, if you and I are, there's this famous one, I think you've probably seen it. I'm going to ruin it for thousands of business school professors, but here goes. They're showing some people intensely throwing a ball back and forth, and you're focused on the ball, and you don't even realize it, but there's a gorilla dancing around in the middle of the ball. We've all seen that by now. The human brain just isn't able to multitask that way. And AI finds it just another set of pixels, and they see a gorilla, they see a ball, and they see 5 other things that nobody even thought about. So that's really great. You can get you got to figure out what to do with the incidental findings. What do you do with the gorilla in the room? But put that to one side. You at least pick it up. And then the next thing that you do is you start to make it easier for all of us to get more access to care. ironically, one of the things, even in affluent societies, but certainly in less affluent societies, it's a big problem of there's not enough scanners, there's not enough doctors, there's not enough to go around.
Mm.
You can get to a point where you can make people more efficient, more effective. The way most of us hear about is you hear about the problems of doctors burning out. They just can't take it anymore.
Yeah.
They're so busy. But what that cost is a lot of people really should be getting care they're not getting. And for a society, one of the biggest benefits of care early is that if I catch something earlier,
Mm.
I typically, A, have a better chance of surviving, which I selfishly like. But then from a societal point of view, it probably is a little easier and less costly to treat. And if you can combine those two things, it's hard to see a downside in that.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that again, I can see mirrors here of what is happening in different other ways this is being applied in the enterprise, but it is very similar, and it makes a lot of sense. Like I was at a analytics conference a couple of weeks ago anyway, and two of the things that I was particularly fond of there that I think is really valuable is the idea of natural interaction with data. So in other words, I can query the data in natural language and get answers back, not ways to find answers, which is a different approach to search completely, right? And I can also then, once I've done that, I can get assistance in describing the visualization and building the whole case around it. And so it sounds like that's a very similar kind of application in the healthcare world.
Yeah. So one of the things that I think, not to talk investments, but one of the most recent AI investments in healthcare was a $50 million investment in a company called Rad AI.
Hmm.
And Rad AI does kind of what you're describing, which is it takes a radiologist's natural language and turns it into an impression of what they saw.
Hmm.
And that makes it easier, it makes it faster,
Yeah.
and that company probably has to look over its shoulder on the company that I referenced that is not even asking somebody to take that first draft. They're providing the first draft.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
it's such a dynamic time that
Yeah.
if we do this again in 6 months, we will have a whole nother level of conversation. And I think that the field is exploding. I think the only thing, and I don't want to shift gears too dramatically here, but the only thing that has actually ironically been holding us back a little bit is I think the business models and the way to pay for this,
Mhm.
how it gets assimilated into the system today, is not yet really not been worked out. And so that's another area that's worth diving into, because I know you're always sort of looking for that intersection of how do you make technology sustainable?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean that to me that is a big piece of kind of the overall that we're starting to see these challenges and limitations, and you don't know what the constraint's going to be. But I've heard this in another show that I do. We've done a few interviews around healthcare, technology, and I've heard that from them that part of the limitation they've run up against is the payer system, the way things work is really for treatment of a thing, not for predicting the treatment of the onset of a thing. So the biggest benefit is also difficult because there's not a model for that already.
And 100%. And one of the ways I've heard it described is we have a sick care system, not a well care system.
Yeah,
So
that makes sense.
it's very difficult to do two things in our system. It's very difficult to get paid to prevent problems, and it's also very difficult it's difficult to get people to prevent, and it's also very difficult to get people to avoid and to pay
Mm.
for quality outcomes. So even though they try to pay for quality, what typically you really are looking to do, the way our system has kind of come to some rough societal compromise, is it's by procedure almost, or some version of that. There's some
Mhm.
unit of work that you feel you get paid for. And they try to make a little bonus if you do better, and so forth and so on. But outcomes are very hard to pay for in our system. And in some ways, I understand that, because in many ways, outcomes are still outside of our control. There's a lot of mystery and luck on being lucky or unlucky. Outcomes
Right.
are sometimes truly beyond our control. But nevertheless, it makes it difficult to make these population health arguments. I could even extend it. This is a little off the topic of AI, but you've started to see some insurance companies deliver food to people because they know that if people are not eating, they're going to get sicker and it's going to be very, very expensive. And so it's actually financially worth it for the insurance company, who has to make certain actuarial decisions, to deliver food rather than have somebody become malnutrition, to become nourished and then have problems. But our system as a whole, you kind of come up with these weird examples, not weird, but, kind of not mainstream examples.
Right.
But in general, we've had trouble even paying for AI. If I were to say to you, if I ran all the scans in the world through AI, I would definitely catch a lot more disease. Your first instinct might be, do it. But our system doesn't have a great way to think about that, and they don't have a great way to think about the fact that not everything that I start seeing is necessarily going to turn in, what we call an incidental finding is going to turn into the problem we think. How much investment do we put into that prevention? These are tough ethical questions that masquerade in some ways as billing questions, but they're really tough ethical questions.
Yeah, I mean that's an interesting one, because a lot of times the incentives drive whatever behavior you're trying to get. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Well, so you mentioned, I know we talked a little bit about privacy and security and ethics, which just came into this part of the conversation too. And I'm curious, how is this starting to impact deploying these systems in healthcare? I mean, is there some limitation there already, or are there things you're doing to try to help address that? Or
Yeah. So I think the privacy issue is an interesting one. And one of the best ways to cure privacy concerns is for people to give consent to the use of their data.
right,
And as we start moving into a world where people understand that, I think you're going to see more of that. But I also think we do a lot. We talked a little bit about de-identification of data. We do a lot to aggregate and de-identify data. And then at the end of the day, I think as a society, we're going to have to continue to think about how do we get to a good place of balancing privacy and also insight from data. Now, by the way, one of the things that I always find ironic about this debate is if you talk to a savvy insurance company executive, they say, I don't need to see your health records. I just need to see your financial records, and I can make a decision about whether I want to insure you. Whatever's on the internet is good enough for me. And that kind of, you have a lot less privacy than you might think you do. And you know this inside out. And there's a lot of this where when you put it right at the moment, if you actually took everything some companies know about you, you might be disappointed.
well, sometimes it's better to just not know. Let's be honest. I mean, there are the time you open up Instagram and it shows you that those athletic shoes you were just talking to somebody about in the room 10 minutes ago.
Right.
That's scary.
That's scary. And so I think there's an evolving debate about privacy, but certainly we work very hard to respect that. And by law, there's a lot that you need to do. And in some ways, quite frankly, that's slowing some of the innovation. And people have decided that's a worthwhile trade-off societally. And then on the ethics piece, I think in some ways we're at the beginning of the ethics, because I don't even know how to think about these questions from a resource point of view, from a who gets what point of view. I'll give you a quick example. A very well-regarded imaging center is starting to use AI. And they basically say to people, you don't have to use it, but if you want to use it, since we can't get reimbursed for it, we will charge you, I think it's $40 extra. And The debate inside of the firm before they launched this program was what's fair, because we don't want it to be an impediment. We don't want it to make it like if you don't have enough funds, you can't get what we think, even though maybe insurance doesn't agree with us yet. But we think as scientists, this is
Mm.
the best thing to do. And those kinds of ethical debates are significant as well. You have that in global health, where you are seeing inequities that exist in depending on where you live. And certainly it's a lot easier in some countries to get high quality care. In certain geographies, it's a lot easier.
Right.
So I think AI in some ways accelerates those ethical conundrums. But at the same time, it holds out the hope of improving them. So if you're in a developing world, we do some cloud work in a developing world where we're running AI in a way that is more aggressive than probably would be the standard of care in the US. Those physicians are doing it in compliance. It's not us, it's the physicians are doing compliance with their rules and regulations because they just don't have enough doctors. And if this is a force multiplier for them, they can help more people. And they've decided we've got to do this to save our own population and make them healthier. And people are grateful, and the ministries of health and the whole piece has decided that's an important advance. So maybe AI can help alleviate some of the challenges that are present today.
Yeah, I mean, it is one of those things that the more you get outcomes that you can document that have been, advantageous in whatever way that might be, the more you trust, the more likely is you can force the system to come into alignment around what you're trying to do. So, yeah,
100%.
that makes
Yeah.
sense. Well, so we're getting close to the end of time that we had allotted today. But one of the things I wanted to hit on before we go, because I love this idea of the crystal ball. So I'm curious for you, what do you think? What do you see here from an advancement perspective? And like you said, it changes. Sometimes I think it changes daily. But what do you see in the field of AI and generative AI for imaging over, say, the next, I don't know, 5 years, which I guess is a long time in the AI world?
It's a long time, but it's also, I think, a good horizon, because I think what we're going to see is the regulatory and business model catch up with the tech. So
Mm.
actually, I think the most interesting advancements are not going to be the technical ones, because that I think is going to go on its own kind of
Yeah.
rocket ship. But the most interesting thing is we're actually going to be able to start to use it, pay for it, and figure out who gets it and when.
Mm.
But that's what, in some ways, maybe it's because I'm not able to be the kind of scientist I watch all my customers be, so I'm jealous. But from a business point of view, I'm very focused on how do we get this into the market, and how does this become part of the way we care for people? Because I think it's just that good. And today, we're not using it enough.
Mm. Yeah, it does seem like there's a lot of opportunity there when you start to think about, even again, I'm applying business terms to this, but when I think about finding benchmarks or trending against some model that is the broader population, anomalies and things like that could be really, really valuable in this environment. Yeah, that's
Yeah, the tech, I mean, the sky's the limit, and it's incumbent on us as a society to figure out how to get it to people. And that that to me, maybe I'm just being a little parochial, because I also think that's probably where I can make the biggest impact
yeah.
personally. So I'm very excited to be able to contribute to making that more of a reality.
Yeah, well, that's great. Really interesting conversation, and I appreciate that. Before I let you go, one of the things I like to ask to help the audience really is, can
Yeah.
you recommend somebody, a thought leader, an author, somebody that you think is influential that they could follow, read, learn from?
Yeah, you know who I think is a fun guy to follow is a friend of mine. So shameless plug for a friend.
Hmm.
But I think there's a guy named Woojin Kim who's on LinkedIn and probably everywhere. But and he does a good job of highlighting different scientific papers. He also will do some fun things. He got married not long ago and went ahead and created a language learning tool for his new wife. He's done AI inspired art. He's a sort of Renaissance thinker that can make some of these ideas a little bit more accessible. So when he wants to talk about generative AI and he shows you how a AI program can mimic a painting style, it's like, oh wait, I get it now.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
that's
kind of fun to
exciting.
follow him. So
Yeah, great. No, that's a good recommendation. Thanks so much. And Morris, I appreciate you joining me today. Really fun conversation. Great to catch up again as well. So thank you very much.
thank you. This was wonderful.
And that's the show for this week. Thank you all for joining. Remember to hit that subscribe button. And for more on AI and other software research reports and posts, check out the arionresearch.com/blog and /research reports. And don't forget to join us next week. I'm Michael Fawcett, and this is the Disambiguation Podcast.